All right, welcome to VOTech Simplified Live, and it's live clearly, because I'd record something that would be a little nicer than that if I wasn't doing this live. All right, and of course I have my new interface that I just plumbed in last week. Everything seems to be working right, and I have all my apps showing here, and so today we're going to talk about RX in terms of plugins versus the standalone. Pros, cons, good, bad, indifferent, things that you should be aware of. And there's always this constant: will RX work within like Audacity, or work within Studio One, or work within Reaper, Audition, whatever? So yes is the answer to most of those questions. It will work in all those DAWs. Now I 90% of the time use it in standalone mode, and there are some advantages, disadvantages, pluses and minuses. Sometimes people just they mentally fight against, oh, I have to export, and if you're doing it right, it's all drag and drop operations anyway. But nonetheless, there are some productivity tools that come from standalone, but then there are some practical things that if you use it in your DAW, that come up all the time that people at first don't know about. So we're going to make sure that you know about those practical things. Let me rearrange this so that it looks a little better here, and life will be easier. And yeah, I'd like that. I got to rearrange the screen here. So that's better. And so I can see a little more. All right. And I'm going to take this and pull this over like this way, right about here. I'll put it over here. All right. So here's the question. So are you using it as standalone? Are you using it with plugins? Every DAW that's out there virtually can use the plugins. If I go into Audacity and I look under my effects, you can see my RX10, RX11. If I scroll down here, I can see even more. I can zoom in. In my case, because I have so many of them, let me zoom in on that. You can see RX6, RX, I don't know how far back I go. It goes a ways. All right. Some of them, I have RX5 on this machine, RX4 on this machine, but you notice that they're all there. This is just showing up in Audacity, and they will show up. Now, it doesn't mean they all work. Just because they show up, some aren't going to work. They can show up at this point, but they just won't work. There's more than what is shown there. And it's the same thing. I'm going to show that if I'm in, I even could use, well, it doesn't make any sense, the RX plugins. RX itself allows for plugins, so third-party things beyond that has a little plugin module here, and I can go ahead and I can select a plugin, and I can enable it, and I can go in and do the kind of the flip side, where I can have a plugin working within RX. Now, it's probably dumb of me. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm, all right, so it's, let's see what it gives me as far as a list there. I don't even know what it's going to show. Oh, the iZotope one, so yeah, I don't really need those. Anyway, I have a whole bunch of other stuff that I could run in there, and I do it sometimes. Sometimes I want to compare things, contrast things, and whatever. So yeah, running them within is cool. But then I showed you could see them all in Audacity, but I'm also going to show them where you can see them all in something like Studio One. For the reason is, if I want on this track, I can go ahead and put all sorts of plugins. These are like native plugins. That's the term used for plugins that come with the program. Reaper has a set of tools that are available, and I would call those native Reaper plugins, or effects. That would be a better way of saying that. But they could be the same exact tool as a plugin. A plugin and a tool could be one and the same, meaning I could have a limiter, and Reaper has its own limiter. Studio One has its own limiter. Those are native limiters. They're from the company that makes the base product. Then there are plenty of limiters and compressors and EQ and all sorts of other things as third-party plugins. Now, so why shouldn't I just put everything? So let's say, for example, I want to go over here. If I choose my little plus sign here, I can add things like RX11 dialogue isolate, RX10 voice denoise. If I really go look at my list, I could add, I got a bunch of them here, and I will zoom in on that just to give you a better idea here. I got a lot of stuff going on here where I could use something from RX 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, I have them all on this machine. I go back to them occasionally. I'll have a client on one of the old ones, but I've been doing this a while. But why don't I just put all of them in? Because then it seems like that's easier. It is easier, but not all. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to use Multi-Click, that's easy. Multi-Click will come up. I don't remember. Yeah, RX11 Multi-Click came up for me. I now can set it. I can establish presets, retain presets. I can do all sorts of things. So what's going to happen is when I export this or when I listen to it, it will add this and it will process it. It always should be above. The limiter should always be last. But now I have a multi-clicker that's working within my track, and when I export it, it is going to be applied at that time, and so it is easy. Okay, you can see there it is right there. I can turn it on, I can turn it off, I can bypass it, I can do all sorts of other things with it. So why would I not just want to stuff everything into one chain here and never think about it? Well, productivity is the primary reason for it. There are some things that have no latency and some things that have latency. So plugins, this is one of the little kind of dirty secrets. Plugins have an interface that they are going through. VST is an interface. Audio units is an interface. There's different ones on the PC, different ones on the Mac. The common one between the two are VST3. I recommend, by the way, if you're using Studio One, always use VST3 on both platforms. It's the most tested. It's the most stable. It's the biggest market. The audio unit, there are proprietary ones, but I'll just tell you categorically, if you have a choice between what you're going to use and you're on the Mac, use the VST3 ones as your primary. And that has to do with Studio One. The other ones, it depends, okay? Now, VST itself, there's a minimum support level needed in order for the plugins to say, I support VST. But it doesn't mean everything is supported any more than it says, hey, I accept American money because I'm a grocery store, but then I might say, I don't accept pennies. So you can't come and I mean, you could, but I'm gonna establish a policy that says, I'm gonna do something for you. It's gonna be $200. Hey, but I don't take pennies. You'll see all over the place, and you go into a store and it says after 10 o'clock, especially like fast food places, after 10 o'clock, they don't take $100 bills because they don't keep that much change around. And that's kind of one of the things that happens when you talk about VST, is that VST is a standard. Steinberg's the one that established that. In fact, the founders of Studio One came out of that development team that established VST. And they worked for Steinberg back in the day, and they were on that team and then they developed Studio One and whatever. They branched off on their own. But behind the scenes, VST itself is a whole product. And then everybody who, I don't know if they have to license it, they give it away. I assume they license it. I don't really know how that works. But then as there are updates, they need to bring in the new one and end up incorporating it into their product in the way that way everything's up to date, because there's security issues. And the security issues are probably the biggest issues that are causing our machines to change all the time. So the plugins have an interface. So sometimes if you acquire a plugin which is relatively obscure and is not well supported by the developer, they may or may not keep up with the latest standards, and then when something needs to change for security reasons, then their product can break. So that's beyond what we really are talking about today. So plugins are going through an interface, but here's the big picture. They have some minor overhead. The interface is a gateway. It's a translator. It's the same thing as, I have a friend who's hard of hearing, and so she can read sign language. So there can be an interpreter, and the interpreter, excuse me, in real time can sign everything, and boom, she gets it. She reads lips. She's very competent at this stuff. She'll combine different things. But there is some lag sometimes between somebody talking and then somebody signing, and then the interpretation. And so it can be everything can go through the interpreter, but there's a process in the middle of the first person and then her listening to it or hearing it or interpreting it would be a better way of saying that. And it's the same thing that happens with VST or plugins. So there's some overhead. And then there's the thing that almost nobody, unless you're kind of in the audio business, would have any clue about, and that's that each individual effect has its own latency. And what does that mean? It means it takes it some time for it to work in the real world. It's not instantaneous. The computers are so fast that it seems instantaneous for a lot of things, but it's X milliseconds. And that can become cumulative. So if I'm sitting out here and I add some effects, so I'm going to be rude. I'm going to add, I'll go through one of them I just happen to know. Dialogue Isolate is an incredible tool. But Dialogue Isolate has this one thing. It's called, it takes it some time to do everything in because it does so much work. And some things need to, if you think of reverb, if I am at this point right here, and the only way I know that the reverb is at a certain point is to pay attention to what's here so that I then hear it echo. It's not really echo, but reverb. I hear the reflection come back. And think of it all in math terms. In math terms, it has to figure out how that is represented mathematically and then what part of it is very faint and at a low level and be able to filter it out. It's just ridiculous what's happening in the background. But because of what it is doing for noise, what it is doing for reverb, a tool like this takes way more time to get its job done. And I'll show you an example in a second here. So let me check for questions. All right. Real plugs. Yes, James, they're free to install and use another dog. Not pretty, but they work. Okay, cool. VST, Virtual Studio Technology, but yeah, who cares about that? VST. And VST3 is what you want. And they update that. In the background, it gets updated. And you'll see, people have a DAW. It doesn't matter which one you have. If you have less supported plugins, you'll have this interesting thing. Your DAW updates, and then all of a sudden the plugin that you've used for 2 years doesn't work. And that's just because that plugin developer didn't keep up, or you don't have the latest of the plugin. It can go both ways. And even iZotope, as they're putting out little versions of bonus. So you're over here, we're talking about RX, and if you choose Help About, which is also on the iZotope RX menu on my Mac, and you get this little screen right down below here at the bottom, you get the build number. Okay, it's really obscure. It's kind of the weirdest thing. It's sitting right down there, 11.103941. I'm on 11.1. That's the most important part, and you should be too. Go to your iZotope account and download the latest. If you haven't gotten one recently over the last few weeks, do it. Check that though. That's it just, you have the latest, and even the plugins have little subtle things that have been updated since the thing released because there are bugs and everything. Okay, so they're just all there. So when you're using them, but let me go back to seeing all this in a DAW. Dialogue Isolate is up here. Now here's something, there's a performance monitor that's available in, and I'm going to show it. So if you're in Studio One, you have something similar in most of the more advanced DAWs have a way of monitoring this stuff. I don't have this in Audition. I don't have this in Twisted Wave. I don't have this in Oaken. They're not sophisticated enough to deal with this. It's all the music ones that Cubase has it, Pro Tools has it. They have a performance monitor because there's a lot going on if you have multiple tracks. And in the background, I'm going to turn on something that allows me to get some information. I want to make sure you can see this here. And I will zoom in on it. What this is this is telling me on this track, these are this particular audio that I have in the background in this file. Here are all the effects that are available and are plumbed into this track. Okay, I'm not going to go over all the details on that, but check this out. Dialogue Isolate here is at 42.6 milliseconds. Mouth declick, which is really considered a fast one, is, let me zoom in on that so you can see those numbers. Yeah, otherwise you have no chance. All right, now you have a chance if you're not on a phone or some postage stamp type screen. So that's 84.9 for multi-click. Dialogue isolate is 42. Now here's the interesting thing. Dialogue isolate, I have it currently set up for good/real time, which means that's the best time it can have, and it's going to take it 42 milliseconds. And what happens is, by putting those in the stream, when I go up and I actually take my audio here and I press spacebar to start playing, there is a lag. And depending on what plugins you put in will determine how much cumulative lag. And that means from the time I press spacebar, let me turn off all this stuff. Hold on. I'm going to turn it all off first, and then I'll turn it back on. So I can go in with one click. All my effects are turned off. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to press my spacebar. 1, 2, 3, spacebar. So 90, and it starts almost instantly. You can probably hear it. You can hear me smashing my spacebar with my thumb. And 1, 2, 3. So now, and you see how it's instant. Now I turn this on again. I do the same thing. 1, 2, 3. So 90% of the time I'm pressing R. Now I don't know if you see, even it's doing some work here in the background, and I have dialogue isolate running, multi-click running. I'm starting to get into kind of a range that's pretty heavy. And then, you know, the more sophisticated DAWs, there's this thing called plugin nap that's in Studio One. Some other DAWs will have a variation on this, but what they're doing is they're looking at what tools are being used and what aren't being used on this track, and going ahead and putting some things to sleep so that it doesn't take CPU power, it doesn't take memory temporarily, or it reduces how much is being used, and it can turn them on and off really quick. But it's right now, since I'm not playing audio, it's napping a bunch of things and saying, hey, I'm not playing audio. The multi-clicker does not need to be consuming CPU when it is not doing anything. So it's pretty sophisticated what's going on there on the more advanced DAWs, but that's beside the point. You can see this number here is sitting at a this is getting right at the edge of what is comfortable, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that so you can see that one's 89. But dialogue isolate right here, I'm going to move this around just so you can see. If I go in to dialogue isolate and I switch it, now first it'll give me a warning because it'll say you're not very smart is really what it's going to tell me. Oh, maybe it's not doing that because I did that previously. It already warned me. I had this file open before I talked to you. So it already warned me, and it said, all right, bozo, this is an issue. So now it's even doing something weird here, okay? This is this plugin. So look at this number. Now we went from what we were at before, which was, I don't know, 46 milliseconds to 2,000 milliseconds just by having this dialogue isolate in its high performance mode. And that's if I'm on best offline. It definitely issues a warning to me the first time I do it, and it says, hey, you better have a really, really, really fast machine to make this work well. And depending on what you do, it can struggle with that. So it has a mode that we go to, and when we do that, it goes back down to 42 milliseconds instead of 2,000 milliseconds. 2,000 milliseconds is 2 seconds. And what all that means is if I turn that on, by the way, well, I'll show it to you in RX. If I turn this on, depending on what I'm doing, and I preview it, you'll see there's a lag from the time I press the space bar to the time it starts. So that just means every punch-in you have lags, every playback you have has a lag. It has to read in a bunch of audio so it can do its job. And that's why sometimes some things just don't make any sense. But I'll show you, if I'm in RX itself, and I go ahead and use dialogue isolate. Now the difference, RX is only doing one tool at a time. A DAW is going to do a combination of tools. Even simple things like your limiter, if I go back here, what's a limiter? A limiter is 1.5 milliseconds. No big deal. This EQ is 0.1 milliseconds, functionally 0. And by the way, native effects tend to be very low latency. These guys spend months optimizing their stuff in order to make sure that it is the absolute smallest footprint it can be and resource consumer it can possibly be. And that's why the native effects tend to be really, really well tuned, or they should be. And so, bottom line, the native ones are almost nothing. When I had the third-party ones, then hey, they take some time to do their thing, and you can see it. If you're in the standalone here, and I'm in good real time, which is the lower of the two, as soon as I press spacebar, 1, 2, 3, taking out the current, it starts almost immediately. I move over here and go to best offline, and I go 1, 2, and I do preview. Put in my, okay, let me, and I'm gonna make sure you know when I'm going to click. I'm gonna press this preview button, and I'm gonna count it down just like I did, and you're gonna see a lag right here where it lags in. And let me see if I can even zoom in on that. So I'll zoom in so you get an idea. Okay, so I'm gonna go down here. You can still see the cursor there. See, cursor's there. I'm here. 1, 2, 3, click. Cursor back, restarting the pre-roll. So there's some before it can even start playing, it needs to read in some audio and then it starts playing. Okay, it's just a few seconds delay. I don't know, in the old days of live radio and live TV, I think they had a 7-second delay on everything. So if somebody swore or something, somebody could censor it out. It's before my time. I didn't pay any attention at that time. But if I remember right, all the broadcasts were behind by a few seconds, especially live things, so that they could censor them out. Well, this is the equivalent. Yeah, you press spacebar, and then and if I press spacebar without the tool, it just starts. If I have this and I'm doing a preview, it has to do some work before it starts. And this is only one tool. And so when you're using the plugins, depending on which ones you use, some have low latency, some have high latency, and it'll be very interesting. You'll notice you put them all in there, and all of a sudden your DAW starts acting slow. It doesn't stop when you do that. Then that's one of the reasons why I have a tendency not to do those. And I certainly don't do some of these tools that are really processor intensive. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. So I'm going to take those out. And then I'll show you some. So here's my kind of takeaway. If I'm just doing mouth to click, sometimes I'll throw that on the track. It's low enough latency. It works really well. I can do that all day long. As soon as I get into denoising, it depends on the level of noise I'm taking out. And it depends on what machine you have. But then that doesn't negate the fact that the standalone has some other advantages that people seem to not talk about very often, but they should. And that's that I go to the standalone, and I not only can get, first off, everyone should be using the standalone to figure out what their settings are going to be. Because if I run mouthy click here, I not only can hear the results, which you can always hear in your DAW, I can see the results. And when you know how the spectrogram works and you use it, it's gold for going through here and picking a number, and I'm just going to take whatever I've got set up here. I do this, and then I go back and I look at it, and I zoom in, and I go, yeah, that did a good job. It didn't do a good job. In the beginning, you don't know whether it was that good, bad, or indifferent. I can undo that. But having done it enough, I know what to see, and so can you once you've seen it enough. So I love, if I'm going to tune something, if I'm going to use a denoiser, I see people all the time doing this. They get a denoiser and they run it in their DAW as their starting point. It's like, yeah, but you can't see the results of it. And there are subtle things that when you see them, any more than if you do a blind taste test, something is a certain way, but your brain, like you've seen these studies. If you take grape juice and you color it orange, it doesn't work for our brain. Our brain finds that a little bit disconcerting. It's just because a lot of our senses work together, and certain things are expected. When you add your eyes with your ears, first, ears are the primary. But you can do an amazing amount when you have a good spectrogram and you combine it with some good ears. And so I love the spectrogram because I've learned so much about audio over the years, but I can see how well a denoiser is working just by measuring out in this section here and by looking at it. I know what it's supposed to look like. You can look at this little indicator up here, and if somebody had done something where they had too much gain, and you see how tall that is right there, I know just by looking at that when I pull up the stats, it's going to be kind of a weird things from a stat point of view. Oh, where's my stats? Hold on here. We got to take this and we're going to edit list filter, go all the way down. There's stats. I should have just done it through my keyboard shortcuts. I don't really need to do that. All right. So I pull up the stats with the keyboard shortcut. I knew just looking at that's too hot. If there had been a refrigerator or a train in the distance, I would see it. If an airplane had gone over, things stand out to you. If you grill burgers, you know what they look like. If you make pasta, you know what it looks like. If you bake cookies, you know what they look like when they're done. And when they're within a certain range. And the more experience you have, the more you can look at a cookies baking of a certain type, and you can say, those look done. Those don't look done. You know from experience what done looks like. And the same thing here. Furthermore, when you're doing standalone, you have this really cool thing. You have something called module chains. And I'm going to go back and show everything here. And if you're doing module chains, then you can have a set of steps all pre-plumbed in, ready to rock and roll. And with one simple, I should take out the other stuff that I did there. With one click, I can operate a bunch of steps on a single file. And while this is working, if this were a 30-minute, 40-minute file, instead of something short, I can go ahead and do something else while it's working. That's a short file. It's a minute. So it goes through really quick. And then the big productivity win is you can also do these batch processes. What does that mean? I can have the same steps that I did to a single file, and now I can run it on 20 files or 40 files or 60 files. And I can pause it when I'm in the middle of it. While this is going on, I can write email. I can do other things. If I put it over here during the export process, it's going to need to do that in real time during the export, and it's going to take some time. There's some you have the same amount of processing to do. At the cost of doing an export, you get to use some batch processing. You get to use module chains. You get an environment where you can learn more and make the most of the tools. And then there are some exceptions. I do some things with the plugin. I just do less of them probably than some others. And many people don't realize that they're avoiding, oh, I don't want to have to export to Wave. By the way, for most DAWs, exporting to Wave, there isn't anything they can do faster, but it does depend on some details. So I'm at probably 80-20, maybe 85, 90% of the time, I'm doing things through batch processes and module chains. Then the rest of the time, I'm doing things, I'm putting something on the track. You have to be careful about what you put there. I can't tell you all of them. I can tell you just if I go through the list over here in RX. Breath control. Breath control. You know, it's one of the highest. It's a real high latency thing. I don't know what it is, but I'll put it on there and I'll find out. Here's breath control, RX11 breath control. Have that in there. I'm going to go to the performance monitor and see what breath control is. Oh, that's not too bad. All right, it's not as bad as dialogue isolate, but it's still 600 milliseconds, which is bad enough to introduce a nice little lag here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, press R, and then I'm pressing C. It lags behind me in the space bar. It lags behind me for stopping. That drives me crazy. So that I'm not going to do. By the way, if I bypass those by just clicking on them, then in R space bar is instant start, instant stop. Everything works as soon as I have those. And if I do some other things, then I'll take some more time and introduce some lag, and definitely that would annoy me more. So can you do it? Absolutely. There's some major productivity wins, though, if you're working on more than one file. And I think even if you're working on one, it's just most of the time I'm using the standalone. Okay? And then, of course, if you have RX11 and you have Studio One, then you do have an in-process spectral editor now that you can go and pull up in an instant and spot clean something if you need to. So that's cool too. It's a different discussion. Okay. So, and James had it right here where he said virtual studio technology, but it's just, you know, the plugin stuff. That's what they named it. It allows an effect to be used in one of 20 other effects. Okay. So standalone is a win if you don't know it well, and if you don't really know the spectrogram well, then do some things to be sure you get that. And I'm going to go back here right to here. I'll go to there. Okay, we got that. Oops, hold on. By the way, there is this whole interesting thing, and then I will go here, tab, and then I go, now I can use my up and down arrow keys. Get back to something reasonable. Okay, so there's something reasonable there, and this whole thing works great. Okay, let me see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions there, so I hope that helps. Dun dun dun. Yeah, and James mentions, for example, that the plugins from Reaper are available in other DAWs. There's actually also even Studio One does the same thing. I think they wanted to match what Reaper was doing. And if you have a copy of Studio One, there's something called the Personas Hub. That if you install that, then you can use all their tools, a bunch of their effects in other DAWs. I don't really know why. I do know why musicians would want to do that. Voiceover, a little less. Okay, so unless there's any other questions or comments, note that when you get into the DAWs that are, you know, kind of the Audacity level DAW, all these tools show up, but a lot of them will not be usable. But the multi-click will work. Voice denoise works really well. Depending on what else you're doing, and by the way, far superior to the tools that are inside of Audacity, so I'd be using these. But you can always export a WAV file, and when you do that, you can use the batch file and the module chains and really get be a lot more productive than when you apply them. You're going to wait anyway. If you can put together batches and do things, you can, the amount of productivity. My wife's working on a 70 chapter book right now. She just recorded all of them, and she's going to process all 70 chapters in RX. And when she starts it, I don't know, she will probably go do something else. She might go exercise, walk the dog, take a nap. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But all that processing time, if she put all the same thing in Studio One, she would have waited for all that time while she's sitting there doing something, where now by doing it all in a batch, she's going to let it rip on all 70 chapters all at once, and she can go do something else. She still could use her machine to record other things if she chooses to, but she's not going to have to. So, okay. Hope this helped. I don't see any other questions in there. So I'm going to assume that either you don't care or you don't have any questions. And so that's cool. That's cool. Be sure to join if you're watching this on YouTube, which everybody is at this point. Then be sure to check out our group that's on Facebook. The little it's at the bottom right there where you can see that. And then and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and like this. You can post this in other groups if you ever choose to. The takeaway that you'll want: plugins are great. I use the standalone, and get good with the standalone before you use the plugins, because you give a totally different perspective when you're using the spectrogram to tune all of your settings. And then if you want to take those settings and use them in the DAW, I do that. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And you can do some things where if you don't need a lot of, depending on your starting point, you sometimes need more or less. So you might get away with doing them all in the DAW, but most of the time, as a habit, just run them through, and it works great. And it keeps you a copy of your audio before it's processed and after it's processed if you're using the batch. I mean, there's a bunch of different wins that you get out of doing it that way. All right. Hope you have a fantastic day. If you have a subject you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on the wires. Have a great day.